The Scott Pilgrim franchise might be perfectly suited for its adaptations into the beat-em-up genre. It's flooded with retro video game references and iconography, and the driving force of its original plot sees Scott fight increasingly dangerous and larger-than-life caricatures of toxic ex-partners in order to date his dream girl Ramona Flowers. But it's also uniquely attuned to the genre in another thematic way. The actual nuance of the Scott Pilgrim story highlights his refusal to mature into a responsible adult. And similarly, the beat-em-up genre has stagnated since its height in the 80s/90s arcade era. Almost every new release of a side-scrolling beat-em-up today is a retro-tinged look back at concepts or franchises from over 3 decades ago. Double Dragon, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Marvel were the big names of that era. And in the last several years, we've seen new entries from all of these IPs, but little in the way of innovation. Scott Pilgrim the character and the beat-em-up genre as a whole both seem to suffer from a case of arrested development. This isn't to say that I dislike what newer beat-em-up games are doing. Scott Pilgrim EX, for example, is a lot of fun. Tribute has reassembled all the prime parties from 2010's Scott Pilgrim vs. the World the game. Anamanaguchi returns to provide its chiptune soundtrack, Paul Robertson delivers the pixel art, and with Brian Lee O'Malley's blessing, the game picks up in the space directly after the events of the recent Netflix series Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. This explains why Scott and Ramona are suddenly able to team up with several of the formerly evil exes like Matthew Patel, Gideon Graves, and Roxy Richter. But the narrative is about as thin as you'd expect from an old-school beat-em-up, despite the fun character writing throughout. A glaring omission from the original experience, however, is that characters no longer unlock new attacks as they level up. They instead just increase across a number of stats. And though each character feels fully fleshed out right from the start, you'll want to switch between the roster regularly to prevent gameplay from feeling stale. Another big change is you can more or less freely roam around a whimsical Toronto, and will need to regularly in order to collect keys or music riffs to open doors or dimensional rifts to new areas. It's fun to explore and unearth hidden paths and secrets, but you will fight a lot of the same enemies as you go. Despite the world map being interconnected, it doesn't fundamentally change much about progressing through each new area to reach its boss. It somewhat artificially extends those encounters by forcing backtracking. So while it's a nice small touch to make the game world feel more whole, it's not the kind of leap in level design I consider to be moving the genre forward. I've also praised releases as recent as Absalom from last year and TMNT Shredder's Revenge from a few years back for making combat feel smoother and faster than older arcades ever did. Absalom in particular added vertical movement options with its sidesteps, which is a step towards remedying a particular pet peeve I have regarding awkward hitboxes along the y-axis of stages. And while layering on stat progression, skill trees, or roguelite elements might deepen what's on offer, these are easily transplantable features that do the same for many other game genres, and don't feel particularly tied to the identity of the beat-em-up. I can't help but feel like none of these titles have made significant steps forward in that regard, with one big exception. Sifu from Slowclap is what I think a modern beat-em-up game should look like. At its core, it's following all the same tenets of the genre. You progress through stages filled with enemies and interactables, you fight said enemies through gradually evolving locations and scenarios, and you take out a boss at the end of each stage. The cinematic nature of its fight encounters, thanks to a third-person camera and 3D environments, are only a small part of how Sifu elevates things. Its unique roguelite mechanic has your failures move your character further down a risk versus reward path where you age as you die and revive, making you stronger but more fragile each time. This not only affects how you play, but your age governs how adept you are at learning new techniques, as it takes the old dog's adage to heart. Stages have multiple paths and shortcuts that may or may not benefit your motives on each run as you make attempts to either make forward progress or uncover more of the background mystery at play. And at the heart of the experience is a deeply technical combat system that rewards mastery and situational awareness. Sifu is unquestionably the high bar I measure other beat-em-ups against, but since its release in 2022, I've not seen many games take swings anywhere near its ballpark. Many of the most well-known IPs remain content to continue revisiting their old formulas. Streets of Rage 4 released 26 years after 3, but stuck close to that game's ideas. The same can be said for several other revivals of classic beat-em-ups. River City Girls, Battletoads, and Marvel Cosmic Invasion all refused to let go of the past and released largely good interpretations of their legacy games. Maybe even great in the case of River City Girls. But is it so wrong to want more? The latest Double Dragon moves the needle ever so slightly, keeping the side on camera but adding 3D models and movement within its stages. A commendable first step, but a baby one in my mind. Again, I don't want to give the impression that these titles sticking so close to their roots is necessarily a bad thing. I quite enjoyed a lot of the games I just listed for the small refinements they've made to a genre I like to play. I just wonder, what will it take for a true boom of next-generation beat-em-up experiences to happen? There's also a chance that beat-em-up isn't a genre that's clearly defined enough to be easily recognized once gameplay systems do evolve around that core. Do we have an easily expressed explanation for why character action games like Devil May Cry or God of War were never considered as such? Though the Yakuza series is probably as modern of a beat-em-up as we have today, it seemingly just jams a ton of side content and RPG mechanics into its package, leaving the actual combat as a fairly basic and uninteresting aspect. I suspect our general consensus traps the beat-em-up in a historical context that refuses to let it advance past a certain level of modernity. If combat gets too fast and too flashy, or if the camera gets too slick and too cinematic, then it can't possibly be a beat-em-up anymore. I don't know when this shift started, but let me be one of the first to try and push back against it. If the primary gameplay of a character you control is to move around an environment and lay hands, feet, and cookie sheets on whatever comes their way, let's just call it a beat-em-up. It's time for this classic genre to join the modern era and act its age.